Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm excited to speak to you today about this week's Torah portion because it's absolutely astounding. I really love this week. I was in awe, my jaw to the floor the whole time I'm reading it. So I'm excited to share my thoughts. Once again, I'm not a rabbi. These are just my personal takeaways from this week's Torah portion. And there's so much infinite depth to the Torah, right? It's not a history book at all, God forbid. It's a guide to and a blueprint for how we can live our lives. And every single word is intentional. There's not an extra space. There's not an extra word. Every single word has infinite depth of meaning that we could never understand the extent of. But anything that we take away from it is helpful, is useful, and beneficial to our lives. The Torah, every week, the Parshah coincides with the energy of the week that's unfolding in our lives, and we can derive powerful, meaningful insights from it that we can apply to navigate our lives in the best way possible, more intentionally with expanded consciousness. So that's the goal here today. And I want to start the first opening part, right? Pharaoh sends the Egyptians out of Egypt. In last week's Parshah, let's get some context. God performs the plagues in the last week and the weeks before that, the 10 plagues that were absolute miracles, right? On the Egyptians so that they should fear God and that Pharaoh should allow Moshe to send the Jewish slaves, the entire nation of Israel, all the Jewish slaves out of Egypt, out of slavery, release them, free them, let them go. And it took 10 plagues for Pharaoh to finally come around, for him to finally accept that God is God. He's the God of the Israelites, and he needs them to leave right now. And he has no power over them anymore. So they finally just got out of slavery, which they were in for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years as slaves. Their morale was extremely low until they saw the plagues. Now Moshe is leading them out of Egypt, out of slavery. So it says, when Pharaoh sent the people away, God did not lead them through the land of the Philistines because it was too close. This is because God said, when the people see a war, they may regret leaving and return to Egypt. God led the people on a roundabout route through the desert to the Sea of Reeds. And there's a commentary. It says, why did God lead the Jewish people on a roundabout route and not straight to the land of Israel? It says one of the options for this, there's so many obviously answers in the commentaries of why God does what he does, and every commentator has their own interpretation. But we can see here, the Jewish people were not yet fit to receive the Torah, for their faith in Moshe was not complete. This is evident from the fact that only later, after the sea split, the Egyptians perished, and the Torah finally states they believed in God and in Moshe, his servant. For this reason, God led the Jewish people on a circuitous route, that they would come to a higher level of belief through seeing his miracles. Wow. We're learning here that God could have put the Egyptians on the fastest route, right? God could put them in the most effective, most efficient, fastest route into the land of Israel to receive the Torah. But why did he choose to put them on a roundabout route that would take them through the desert, which doesn't sound like a pleasurable experience? So the answer in the commentary says that it was because they didn't yet have strong enough emunah, strong enough faith to be able to go into the land of Israel, to receive the Torah. How practical in our own lives. Sometimes we desire something so much, and we've been praying for it, we've been visualizing it, we've been doing all the hishtadlut, the effort, but it just doesn't manifest in our lives. And we're like, God, right? I just want to get married already. Why are you putting me on these awful dates with the wrong people time and time again, for an example? And God says, no, you need to go through the desert. You need to go on a roundabout way because you're not ready yet. You're not spiritually ready to receive all that infinite bracha that I want to shower on you. Your faith is not yet where it can be. It's not yet where it needs to be. And we're building you up by taking you on a roundabout route, making you stronger. And maybe you're wondering why you had to work at this, why you're not getting the job offer that you so deserve. You've been doing the effort. You did all the right things. You've been praying. But it seems like it's going nowhere, right? It's taking so much longer, the process, than expected. It seems like God is really dragging you through the desert in a sense. Well, this enlightens us that it's because you might not yet be fit to receive the Torah, just like the Israelites. You know, you very well definitely have your dreams coming. They're on the way. All the blessing that God wants to shower upon you, it's there. It's yours. No one can take anything away from you that's already destined for you. God is the giver of all goodness. But if you're not yet at the spiritual level and your emunah, your faith is not strong enough, and you still need to have, you can come closer to your connection, to your relationship with God, He's going to take you on a longer roundabout way. He's going to take you through the desert. Because the purpose of life isn't to get what we want. The purpose of life is to strengthen our relationship and our certainty in the Creator, in God. And how do we do that? Is it by getting exactly what we want when we want it? Or is it by maintaining faith and maintaining emunah through the desert, through the roundabout way? So I just think that's an important takeaway right. That's literally the first line of this week's Parsha. It's incredible. So the next part I want to talk about is, as the Jews are leaving Egypt, they see the Egyptians chasing after them. The pasuk says, chasing after them, and overtook them while they were encamped by the sea. Moshe said to the people, "Don't be afraid. Stand firm and see God's salvation that He will perform for you today. You may be seeing the Egyptians today, but you will never see them again. God will fight for you, but you must remain silent." Wow. Okay. If my Hebrew was like better, I would read in Hebrew. Actually, let's read in Hebrew. Because I think there's power to the Hebrew letters. Vayomer Moshe el ha'am, al tira'u hityatzvu uru et Yeshuat Hashem asher ya'aseh lachem hayom ki asher re'item et Mitzrayim hayom lo tosifu lir rotam od ad olam. God says, don't be afraid. Stand firm and see God's salvation that He will perform for you today. You may be seeing the Egyptians today, but you will never see them again. God will fight for you, but you must remain silent. Okay. In our lives, how many times, in this week specifically, I'm personally dealing with old fears coming up, and we're dealing with old fears coming up that are asking us to show that we've spiritually matured through them, and to show that we are not afraid, that we have trust that God saved us in the past. He was a salvation for us before, so too He will never abandon us, and He's a salvation for us yet again. His track record is 100 out of 100. It's perfect. He will never abandon us, and He has never abandoned us, so don't be afraid. Pass this test. If you're going through something right now that's really, really trying you, and it's really testing your faith, and it's just frightening you, it's making you scared, think how the Israelites felt when they saw that the Egyptians were pursuing them, and they were so outnumbered. But Moshe told them, don't be afraid. Stand firm and see that God will save you today. Today, you need to expect a miracle. Us in our own lives. Today, every day, we need to wake up and think a miracle can happen for me today. Today is a new day. It's a brand new, fresh opportunity. God can send salvation for me today in the blink of an eye. Just as He sent it for me before. As humans, we have the tendency to focus on the bad and to focus on scarcity and what we lack. And we tend to forget all the tremendous amount of salvations that God did for us in the past. So force yourself to think back to a time, if you're scared of something right now, that you were scared of something similar in the past. And think about how God brought you through that, what the salvation was. So important. God will fight for you. It says, God in the pasuk right here, God's going to fight for you. You're not here alone. You're not doing this alone. God's fighting for you, but you need to remain silent. You need to remain steadfast. Don't complain. Don't use your words and waste your precious gift of speech, the most powerful facet that we have as humans, on words of fear. It's too easy. We spiritually matured through that, just like the Egyptians just like the Israelites spiritually, technically, you could argue, should have matured to not be afraid. I mean, they witnessed 10 absolute miracles, the plague of darkness, the wild beasts in Egypt, the locusts that came and destroyed and ate everything in Egypt. They witnessed all the firstborns dying, the death of the firstborn. They saw miracles in Egypt. Did they really not believe that God would save them again? Did they really need to be afraid? No, it just goes to show human nature and how we quickly come to fear. And we forget all the miraculous salvations that God just did for them in last week's Parshah. So too, he just did them for us. Think back in your own life. You know what I'm saying? Let's continue. I love this. God says to Moshe, "Why do you cry out to me? Speak to the children of Israel and tell them that all they have to do is travel." All we have to do in our own lives is keep going, is travel, is maintain emunah, is keep going. And then it says, "I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, they will come after them." God says, "I will be glorified by wreaking vengeance upon Pharaoh, his army, his chariots, and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am God when I will be glorified through wreaking vengeance on Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen." So many times it feels in my life like God performs miracles and salvations as a means of just reassuring us that he is God, that he can perform miracles and salvations for us, and that he was always looking out for us, and that he has a plan. Everything is about glorifying God. And we don't glorify God when we mope around and when we're miserable and complaining about our lives and our problems, like the Egyptians in the desert, as we're about to read. We glorify God when we have trust and have certainty that everything is for the good, and when we walk gracefully. So I just want to make that point about how important it is to think about if our actions are glorifying God or not. Because clearly God does this miracle. He says, "I will be glorified by Pharaoh, his entire army." He didn't have to send Pharaoh after the Israelites to glorify himself, right? He's God. He could just kill all of them right in Egypt. Why did the Egyptians even chase the Jews as far as they did to the sea? Oh, it was so that God could perform an outright miracle and prove to everybody he's God. That's the purpose of miracles, and that's the purpose of needing salvations and experiencing them, is so that we can come to know, oh, right, God's running the show. This is God running the show. This is God running the show. Strengthen our emunah, emunah, emunah. That's why the system is set up, so that we pray for salvations, we go through tests and challenges, we take a roundabout way through the desert, and eventually we do receive them. So we should understand that God is running the show. Okay. In this week's Parsha, something that sticks out is how protected the Jews were in their journey through the desert. So God does take them through the desert in a roundabout way. It wasn't pleasurable. It was filled with fear for the Israelites, for the Jews. But if you look at how much protection God offered them, it's absolutely miraculous. And he really was with them every step of the way. It says, "The angel of God who was going in front of the Israelite camp moved and went behind them to intercept the arrows and catapult stones of Egypt. A pillar of cloud moved away from in front of them and stood behind them. It came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel." Those camps were obviously fighting. Thus the cloud and the darkness were there for the Egyptians, but the children of Israel had the pillar of fire which illuminated the night. So one camp did not approach the other all night. It's just like the Torah has no extra words, right? It goes into extensive detail about the cloud, the pillar of fire. Like, why, right? What do we practically derive from this? It could have said this in a more succinct, concise way, no? So the reason that I take away from it is that we should be aware that when we're walking through the desert of our lives, we're taking the roundabout way, we're going through challenges, and we don't see a way out, and we don't understand why we're there. God is protecting us and intimately involved with even the most minute details as to whether the cloud moved in front of the camp or behind them. God is both in front of us protecting us, behind us and protecting us, and that is the level to which his protection extends. He is so intimately involved in our lives and protecting us even through our roundabout journeys in the desert. He loves us. He has to, yes, he has to have us walk through the desert and go through that pain, but not more pain than that. Not more pain than that. God knows the extent of our suffering, and he doesn't let us experience a hair's breadth more suffering than we need to do our correction. It reminds me of a couple parshas back when, earlier in the Torah, when, in Bereshit, when Yosef is sold into slavery by his brothers, and he's put into a caravan. And I hope I'm remembering all the details correctly. I heard this from someone who heard, like, as a story. So the person told me that Yosef was put into slavery, and obviously that's the most painful thing ever. He was literally going down to Egypt in the caravan, but it says the caravan was filled with fine spices and incense that smelled really good the whole time. And I think a midrash says that. And that's to say that although God decreed that, yes, Yosef should go down to Egypt and be sold as a slave, and that would happen, that challenge, the ride there should be pleasurable, should smell good. The ride there into going into captivity and slavery, the ride there should smell good. That was too much suffering for Yosef. To be in a caravan that's reeked and was disgusting would be too much suffering, and that was not in God's plan for Yosef. So even in our lives, when we're going through unbearable circumstances, know that it's not a hair's breadth, that God doesn't want you to experience a hair's breadth more suffering than needed to completely come to your correction. Okay, moving on. The salvation comes. I just want to read this. Moshe stretched his hand out over the sea, and God moved the sea with a strong east wind throughout the entire night. He made the sea into dry land, and the water split. Then the children of Israel came into the sea on dry land. The water acted for them as a wall on their right and on their left. It was towards the morning that God looked down on the Egyptian camp with a pillar of cloud. He threw the Egyptian camp into confusion. He removed the wheels of the chariots, and he treated them harshly. Egypt said, "Let me run away from the Israelites, because God is fighting for them against the Egyptians." God said to Moshe, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, and the water will revert from being a wall unto Egypt, unto its chariots and horsemen." The sea itself, which was preventing the Egyptians from crossing the sea, right? They're stuck at the sea. How are they going to get across? The Egyptians are trailing behind them. The Israelites are growing more and more scared. Here's the sea in front of them. And the sea itself became the wall that protected them from the Egyptians. The very challenge in front of them became the thing that ultimately protected them and prevented the Egyptians from coming to them, because the Egyptians drowned in the sea. On that day, the children of Israel went on dry land in the midst of the sea, and the water was for them a wall on their right and on their left. The very challenge that befalls us could be the thing that's saving us, could be our salvation. On that day, God saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians. Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great might which God enacted on the Egyptians, and the people feared God. They believed in God and Moshe, his servant. Isn't it interesting that it says they believed in God. They finally, after that miracle, not after each of the 10 miraculous plagues, but after the splitting of the sea. And then they sing a song of praise to God and to God right after that. So what if we could come to that level of fearing God, of singing his praise before he splits the sea for us? What if we didn't need to recount this story in our lives because we were able to tap into that feeling of security and that feeling of absolute certainty that God will split the sea for us. He will be a salvation for us. And we could have that joy and that gratitude that the Egyptians only had when they had to go through that before it even happens. I hope that this helped you to connect to this week's Parshah. Let me know if it did in the comments below and by liking this video and following and subscribing to this channel. And I will, God willing, see you next week.